Welcome to Legacy Black Power. 25 Black R&B legends who had the most tragic deaths in history. Amid the glitter of Hollywood lights, the music industry once lifted Black artists onto pedestals as legends. But just as quickly, it cast them aside in silence. Behind the Grammys, behind the roar and applause, behind the million-dollar mansions, were hearts left abandoned by the public, by their managers, even by their own families. These were stars who once ruled the Billboard charts, cruised in luxury cars, and moved entire generations with voices that could break your soul wide open. Yet, too many of them died alone. A king of soul, gunned down by his own father in the very home he bought. A piano genius, wasting away in a mental hospital, no loved ones by his side. And if you think that's where the tragedy ends, brace yourself. The 25 most heartbreaking stories of Black R&B singers in Hollywood will leave you shaken, with anger, with sorrow, with compassion. And if there's a song that ever stopped your heart, stay with us until the end, because these voices deserve to be remembered, not erased. Sam Cooke. To this day, people can still picture him, dressed sharp in a white suit, standing under the glow of stage lights, his velvet voice flowing like honey into the ears of thousands. He wasn't just a singer, he was a pioneer, the first Black artist to shatter racial barriers in American popular music, from the gospel choirs of the church to the heights of R&B stardom. Cooke gave the world timeless classics like You Send Me and A Change Is Gonna Come. But behind the spotlight lived a man torn apart, unstable, restless, often drowning in alcohol, fleeting affairs, and feelings of betrayal. At the height of his fame, Sam did the unthinkable for a Black artist of his time. He founded his own record label. It was a bold act of independence, but it came with heavy consequences. Suddenly, lawsuits, financial battles, and whispers of government surveillance followed him everywhere. Friends remembered him drinking alone late at night in the studio. In his final months, they said he moved as if someone was watching him. On December 11, 1964, Sam Cooke left a Los Angeles nightclub with a woman named Elisa Boyer. Hours later, he was dead, shot by a motel manager named Aretha Franklin. Franklin swore it was self-defense, claiming Sam, drunk and enraged, had stormed into her office half-naked, demanding to know where Boyer had gone. But when the body was examined, the story didn't match. Bruises, broken bones, and blood from his head suggested something far darker than a struggle. Boyer herself was later convicted of kidnapping, fueling even more suspicion. Why was Sam Cooke, smart, strong, and fearless, pulled into such a violent, humiliating end? Why did the police close the case so quickly, despite the unanswered questions? Many still believe he was silenced not for what he did, but for what he dared to stand for his fight for freedom, for giving Black artists ownership of their voices, for singing about a change that terrified those in power. Sam's death didn't just take a man. It robbed the world of a dream that had barely begun. He once sang that change was going to come, but maybe the price of that change was his life. For those who still listen to his music, the wound never healed. It's a reminder that in this world, the people who try to do what's right are often the ones who pay the greatest price. So if you remember Sam Cooke, remember him not just as a singer, but as a voice of truth. Live kindly, stand bravely, and never let that voice be silenced by the darkness of power. Jackie Wilson. Jackie Wilson was more than just a singer. He was a force of nature, the brightest light in the soul music scene of the 1950s and 60s. Fans called him Mr. Excitement, the very blueprint of live performance. On stage, he was untouchable, rolling, spinning, leaping like a spring, and somehow still belting out high notes with absolute perfection. Elvis Presley himself once admitted, "If anyone deserves to be king, it's Jackie." But behind the dazzling smile and electric stage presence was a man trapped in shadows. Jackie's life off stage was anything but glamorous, plagued by alcohol, mounting debt, and tragedies that clung to him like a curse. Even from his youth, his talent was matched only by his reputation for living recklessly. When he signed with Brunswick Records, a label quietly controlled by the mafia, it should have secured his fortune. Instead, millions flowed into hidden accounts while Jackie was left with scraps. Every time he protested, he was silenced with threats. To the public, he looked like a superstar swimming in wealth. In truth, He often had to borrow money just to feed his wife and children. It was a secret he carried to his grave. The cruelest twist came on September 29, 1975. While performing his hit Lonely Teardrops at a charity event in New Jersey, Jackie belted a line, "My heart is crying," and suddenly collapsed. The crowd thought it was part of the act, until he never stood up again. He had suffered a massive stroke and cardiac arrest, leaving him in a vegetative state. From that night until his death in 1984, Jackie Wilson was a prisoner in his own body. Nearly a decade passed with him lying silent, motionless, and forgotten. The fans drifted away. His family couldn't afford proper care, and the very company that had profited off his name turned its back as though he had never existed. In his final years, Jackie was discovered wasting away in a rundown nursing home, a once great star now faceless to the world. Nurses only later realized that the man on life support had once brought America to its feet, igniting stadiums with his voice. His end was not just a personal tragedy. It was a brutal reminder of how easily the industry discards its brightest talents when they can no longer perform. Jackie Wilson's death marked the loss of a legend, but more than that, it exposed the dark price of fame built on exploitation. If you ever felt your heart skip when Jackie sang, let his words linger. Live a kinder life every day, because sometimes what an artist needs is not tears after death, but justice while they're still alive. Etta James. On stage, Etta James was pure fire, untamed, unquenched, unforgettable. Her voice, raw and husky yet achingly soulful, could melt even the hardest of hearts. When she sang at last, it became more than just a song. It became an anthem of love, echoing through grand ballrooms and humble southern churches alike. But when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Etta's life was haunted by shadows, addiction, violence, abandonment, and a slow slide into oblivion. Born into poverty and left behind by her parents, she grew up tough, restless, and aching for love. By her teenage years, she had fallen into the grip of heroin. Still, she lit up stages with legends like Ray Charles and Sam Cooke, and inspired future icons like Beyoncé and Christina Aguilera. Yet her defiance and addictions kept her on the fringes of an industry that never fully embraced her. Arrests, forced rehabs, and long hospital stays became more familiar than recording sessions. By the 1980s, her name had nearly vanished. Once a headliner, she was now living on welfare, performing in smoky bars and hiding the scars, both from needles and from life. In 2010, the devastating news came: terminal leukemia. The announcement drew only a trickle of condolences from a few artists and die-hard fans. In her hospital bed, staring at the blank ceiling, she asked her son, "Do they still remember my voice?" There were no flowers, no farewell concerts, only the cold beep of a heart monitor. Even as her breath failed her, she tried to record one last song, but her voice, once a force of nature, was too fragile to rise. When she died, tributes appeared briefly online, but the world quickly moved on. A legend slipped away quietly, as if her brilliance was just a fleeting memory of a bygone era. And so the haunting question lingers: why was a talent like Etta forgotten even before she was gone? Was she too raw, too wild, too unapologetically real? Some voices move us to tears, but some lives force us to ask, do we still have room for compassion? Because artists don't just need applause in their youth. They need to be remembered, even when their voices have long gone silent. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was a heartbeat of 1970s R&B. His music was more than melody. It was a collision of love and pain, earthly passion, and a cry from the heavens. From sexual healing to what's going on, Marvin didn't just sing. He poured every wound of society and every scar on his own soul into those songs. But no one could have imagined that the man who seduced millions with his velvet voice would lose his life in the house where he was born, at the hands of his own father. Marvin grew up in a home ruled by religion and fear. His father, a stern preacher, demanded obedience and delivered cruelty, both physical and emotional. Marvin longed to escape, and music became his sanctuary. Yet the shadows of his childhood never let him go. Addiction followed him. Depression weighed him down. More than once, he tried to end his own life. By the early 80s, Marvin had lost his way, drifting through Europe in search of peace. only to return to Los Angeles, to his mother's home, trying to heal. But the demons still trailed him. On April 1st, 1984, just one day before his 45th birthday, an argument over something as trivial as letters spiraled into tragedy. Overcome by anxiety and rage, Marvin lashed out at his father. Moments later, the old man reached for the very gun Marvin had once bought to protect the family. He turned, pulled the trigger, and shot his son through the chest. The bullet pierced Marvin's heart. He died on the way to the hospital. His father was arrested but walked free with only a suspended sentence, citing old age and self-defense. The world was left stunned. Some whisper that Marvin had orchestrated his own death by returning to the home he feared. Others believed he was simply the final casualty of a family torn apart long before that day. One truth remains. Marvin Gaye lived too intensely, felt too deeply, and carried his loneliness like a crown of thorns. He once wrote, "If you cannot find peace in this world, at least let music soothe your soul." Marvin is gone, but his voice still lingers, aching, healing, whispering through time. And his story leaves us with one haunting lesson. Never let the person you love most become the one who could destroy you. Johnny Bristol. He was a quiet genius behind the spotlight, the man who gave Motown its heartbeat. His name was rarely sung on stage, yet his words carried Marvin Gaye, Tammy Terrell, and Gladys Knight to the heights of fame. With his smooth voice, sparkling eyes, and polished presence, record executives once called him the bridge between love and music. But no halo of past glory could protect him from the silence that came at the end, alone, forgotten in a Detroit apartment. At Motown's peak, Johnny was a powerhouse producer. His hand helped shape timeless hits like Ain't No Mountain High Enough. When he left the label in the early 70s, he tried to carve his own path as a solo artist. For a brief moment he did, with the sultry Hang On In There, Baby. But the 1980s were merciless. Tastes shifted, labels turned their backs, and fresher faces filled the stage. Suddenly, Johnny was out of style. The royalties trickled in, the shows grew smaller. To friends, he remained polite, upbeat, even charming. But behind that smile was a man hollowed out by absence. He once confessed, "There's nothing more painful than writing a love song the world sings, and yet no one remembers a man who wrote it." In his final years, Johnny lived quietly in Detroit. Neighbors recalled seeing him at a second-floor window in the week before his death, whispering old lyrics to himself, as if clinging to echoes of a brighter time. On March 21st, 2004, he was found lifeless. No foul play, no farewell note, just silence. Officially, it was natural causes. Unofficially, many believed he had simply run out of reasons to fight. Television didn't cover it. A week later, a small local paper printed a single line about the passing of the man who wrote songs of eternal love. That was it. No fanfare, no spotlight, just a quiet exit from a world he once painted in melody. Johnny Bristol gave everything to make others shine, but left like a ghost in the very music he had colored with passion. And yet, if you listen closely, his voice still lingers in every lyric, in every note of the songs he touched. His story leaves us with a reminder. Kindness isn't measured by fame, but by the love you give when no one is watching. To live gently, to love quietly, that is a legacy stronger than any hit record. Howard Tate. In the 1960s, critics called him the hidden voice of American soul. His voice was fire and smoke all at once, soaring high, plunging deep, fierce yet tender. Songs like Get It While You Can Just Move People. They left him breathless, drowning in a sadness too raw to fake. But unlike many of his peers, Howard never found a fortune to match his gift. In one cruel twist, he lost everything, and then lost himself for nearly 3 decades. He had started young, guided closely by the legendary soul producer Jerry Ragavoy. With major label deals and a voice like no other, his future seemed unstoppable. But tragedy struck when his young daughter died in a house fire. Howard couldn't bear the weight. He turned first to the bottle, then to harder drugs, until addiction swallowed him whole. Almost overnight, the rising star fell. He lost his career, his home, even custody of his children. By the 1980s, Howard Tate had vanished. Rumors spread. Some said he was dead. Others whispered he was homeless. The truth didn't surface until 2001, when a journalist stumbled into a small New Jersey church and heard a middle-aged man singing like the heavens had cracked open. When asked his name, the man only smiled. I used to be Howard Tate. His return was short but unforgettable. He released a new album that critics praised, a fragile reminder of what once was. But time had taken its toll. Age and illness clipped the wings of his second chance. In 2011, Howard Tate died quietly in a struggling hospital, worn down by years of cancer and diabetes. Relatives said that in his last days, he would lie staring at the ceiling, whispering the lyrics he once gave away for others to sing. His passing didn't make headlines. No loud farewell. But for those who had ever heard that voice, it cut deep. Howard Tate was a soul, singer the world abandoned when he needed saving most. His story is a kind of sorrow only middle-aged hearts truly understand. He once sang, "Take what you need while you can." His life proved a warning. If we don't cherish one another while we're here, regret is all that follows. Be kind. Because sometimes even the smallest word of love can keep someone from slipping into the dark. Ray Charles, the blind man who saw America's soul clearer than anyone else. Dressed in his signature white suit, his fingers gliding across the piano keys, his voice rising and falling like a storm that could silence an entire crowd. He wasn't just an icon of soul, jazz, and blues. He was a revolution. He shattered barriers, blending gospel with rhythm and blues, crossing the color line in music when few dared. But behind the ovations and the glow of the spotlight lived another Ray, a man scarred, addicted, and carrying memories too heavy to share. Blind since the age of 7, motherless at 15, he grew up with loneliness as his closest companion. Music saved him, but also consumed him, thrusting him into a world where everyone wanted his sound, yet no one wanted his pain. For decades, heroin chained him down. Though he broke free, the fear of relapse never left. After shows in the silence of hotel rooms, he would pour himself a stiff drink, strum his guitar, and cry quietly where no one could see. By 2003, his body was failing. Doctors found severe liver disease, cirrhosis, and signs of multiple organ failure. He rejected harsh treatments. He didn't want to die in a cold hospital bed. Instead, he staged a short farewell tour, his way of saying thank you, before retreating to his Beverly Hills home. A maid later recalled that in those final days, Ray would murmur fragments of old lyrics, whispering, "Will the audience still clap for me?" The world was stunned when the news broke, but his closest friends said Ray had made his peace. He even refused strong painkillers, determined to feel every last heartbeat. The final note of his life song. Ray Charles left quietly, but his music remains eternal. And yet, one haunting question lingers. How much talent is enough to heal the loneliness of a child who once cried alone in the corner of an orphanage? If you still hear Ray's piano drifting somewhere in the night, remember this. Living a good life isn't about being remembered. It's about reaching some suffering soul and letting them know they are not alone. David Ruffin. David Ruffin was a voice that could break your heart in a single note. At the center of the Temptations, he wasn't just a singer. He was the soul, the pillar, the cry of a black generation demanding to be heard. But behind that voice was a troubled man, haunted by anger, consumed by addiction, and destined for a lonely end in the very city that once worshipped him. His fame exploded with My Girl, one of Motown's most timeless love songs. But that same spotlight became too bright. By 1968, he was pushed out of the group. Alone, he tried to build a solo career, but the success he once held slipped further from reach. Drugs tightened their grip. Arrests followed. So did violence, erratic outbursts, and uninvited appearances on stage. Ruffin lived as if he were untouchable, immortal, already beyond saving. In June 1991, after a night of partying in West Philadelphia, Ruffin stumbled into a hospital showing signs of a drug overdose. Nurses recalled him barely able to speak, repeating only, "I'm fine. I just need to lie down for a while." Minutes later, his heart gave out. The official report said overdose. But the mystery lingered. He hadn't come alone. Someone had dropped him at the hospital door. Yet no one admitted to it. Rumors spread that he was abandoned, dragged out of a car, and left like a burden at the gate. The case was closed quickly. No investigation. No arrests. To the public, his death was the inevitable price of his rebellion. Ruffin once admitted, "I'm no angel, but I know how to sing and make people cry." And he did, both in life and in death. The cold, lonely way he left this world brought tears once more. If you've ever loved a Temptation song, take a moment to show kindness. Because too often, the most gifted among us are the first to be forgotten once the spotlight fades. Otis Redding. Otis Redding was a blazing sun in the world of soul, rising too early, setting far too soon. At just 26, his life ended, but not before he carved a legacy so powerful the world bowed in reverence. His voice was not just sound. It was a prayer pulled straight from the heart. Thunder and tenderness fused into every note. Songs like Try a Little Tenderness could break an audience in half, leaving them in tears before the first verse had even ended. Then came the song that would define him forever. Just days after recording Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, Otis stepped into a plane he would never step out of. December 10th, 1967. Madison, Wisconsin. A storm had lingered the night before. Gray skies, heavy fog. A friend asked him, "Should we wait for the light?" Otis only smiled. "The music can't wait." At 3 p.m., the plane vanished from radar. Neighbors near Lake Monona recalled hearing a single, shattering boom, then silence. The wreckage was pulled from the icy waters, with only one survivor, bassist James Alexander, who had taken a different flight. Hours later, they found Otis still strapped to the seat, his mouth open, as if caught mid-song. The news shook the nation. Only the day before, millions had watched him sing on television. Whispers spread. Was it the age of the plane? A storm's curse? Or was it fate? Some said Otis had sensed his end, writing lyrics about loneliness and death in the days before his flight, as though he were sketching his own goodbye. He never lived to hear Dock of the Bay climb to the top of the Billboard charts, the first posthumous #1 in history. He never heard those waves at the end of the record, his idea echoing eternity. "I just sit here watching the tide go by," he had sung, and then he drifted into the tide forever. Otis Redding's life was brief, but his lesson was eternal. Live full, live now, because none of us know when the last note will fade. Curtis Mayfield. Curtis Mayfield wasn't just another voice in soul music. He was its conscience, the poet, the prophet, the man who wrapped hope and struggle into melodies that carried the weight of a generation. People get ready. Move on up, even the gritty soundtrack of Superfly. These weren't just songs. They were prayers, battle cries, and sermons for a community standing in the fire of injustice. But fate can be cruel. And for Curtis, it struck in the very place he had always been strongest, on stage. It was August 1990 in Brooklyn, the air thick with summer rain, the crowd buzzing with anticipation as the tinted stage swayed under gathering winds. Curtis walked out, the cheers rising like thunder. He had barely finished his first song when the storm made its move. A steel frame holding the spotlight gave way, crashing down onto his neck. In an instant, the music stopped. Curtis lay motionless. The stage that had carried him his whole life had betrayed him in one violent moment. From that day on, Curtis was paralyzed from the neck down. A man who once stood tall for his people was confined to a wheelchair, tethered to machines, racked with pain. But surrender was never in his vocabulary. Even without the use of his arms, he recorded his final album, New World Order, lying flat on his back. Line by line, breath by breath, he stitched songs together, a technician recalled. He once coughed for 20 minutes just to sing 2 words, but he refused to quit. In December 1999, Curtis Mayfield slipped away quietly from complications of diabetes and paralysis. No grand funeral, no spotlight farewell. But for those who heard him, his absence was an unfillable void. Some called his accident a cruel joke of destiny. Others believe it was his final test, to prove that while a body can be broken, a voice, a spirit, a message can remain unshakable. Curtis himself never complained. "When life takes something away from you," he once said, "it teaches you something else." And that's the lesson he left behind. Resilience. Grace, the courage to keep a light burning inside, even when darkness falls from above. So if you can still walk, laugh, breathe, don't take it for granted. Cherish it, and be kind, because you never know who around you is fighting a battle in silence, carrying pain that is no song. Aretha Franklin, when she stepped onto a stage, she didn't just sing, she summoned the soul itself. Her voice was thunder and bomb all at once, a force that carried power, dignity, and unconditional love. From respect to natural woman, Aretha didn't just redefine soul music. She redefined what it meant to be a black woman in a world scarred by prejudice. But behind the glittering crown of the Queen of Soul lived a woman waging battles few ever saw. She endured the heartbreak of teenage pregnancy, a father gunned down, 2 divorces, and the crushing weight of sustaining a legendary image for more than 60 years. In her final years, she withdrew from the spotlight. She didn't want anyone to see her weak, a relative revealed. Even as pancreatic cancer quietly consumed her, Aretha still forced herself to sing at tribute shows, clinging to the stage that had always been her sanctuary. By the summer of 2018, her strength faded. She stopped eating, stopped drinking, lying motionless, but still asked to hear her old recordings. The day she passed, the world fell into silence. Yet the truth is, Aretha had been slowly retreating long before, keeping the media at arm's length, as though she wanted to leave this world in peace, undisturbed. People say Aretha Franklin died like a queen, but only she knew the weight of that crown, heavy with sacrifice and sorrow. And when the music finally stopped, what remained was a heart that had given everything to others and had rarely been sung to in return. If you've ever listened to an Aretha song and felt stronger, live a life worthy of those lyrics. Because sometimes the truest way to honor her gift is not just to hear her voice, but to learn to listen the way she once listened to the world, with her whole heart. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard was once called the true soul of the Supremes. Before Diana Ross became the crown jewel, Florence stood at the center. Powerful, rich, instinctive. Her voice wasn't polished. It was pure feeling. She sang with heart, not perfection. But in the world of Motown, only one was chosen for glory. Florence wasn't that one. And slowly, she slipped into silence until the day her heart stopped beating in a small, shabby apartment. No one even noticed. Pushed out of the Supremes in 1967, the official story claimed she was unprofessional. The truth? She was tired. Tired of being sidelined, tired of the blatant favoritism that lifted Diana while dimming her own light. She tried to start over, signing a solo contract. But Motown never backed her. One canceled album, a few lonely shows, and then nothing. She faded away. By 1974, Florence was living in a cramped apartment with her 3 children, surviving on welfare. Neighbors sometimes heard her singing on the balcony, as if rehearsing memories no one wanted to remember. Once at a bank, she asked for a loan. "I used to be a Supreme," she whispered. The clerk just stared. Fame had vanished. She was invisible. On February 22, 1976, Florence Ballard suffered a heart attack and died at only 32 years old. There was no grand farewell, no glittering tributes. People say she died of poverty, of being forgotten. But the truth runs deeper. She died of a heart broken too many times, a voice drained and discarded by the very stage it once electrified. If you ever believe fame was forever, remember Florence. And if a song has ever made you cry, remember kindness, because behind the spotlight are countless voices who once gave everything, only to be left behind. You've journeyed with us through 12 of the most tragic deaths, and we thank you. But the story isn't over. The heartbreaks ahead will make you look back on an era with unspeakable sorrow. So we leave you with a question. Do famous people get abandoned more easily? Share your thoughts. Your answer might awaken someone else. Barbara Lewis. Barbara Lewis once moved an entire nation with a voice so tender it felt like the final sigh of a rainy afternoon. Hello, Stranger wasn't just a song. It was a soul ballad that defined the early 60s, a melody that wrapped itself around America's heart. Yet, in a way, it was also a prophecy. The same quietness that lingered in her voice became the silence in which she chose to live, and eventually to leave this world. After her moment of glory, Barbara stepped away from the spotlight. She refused interviews, avoided cameras, and all but vanished. Few knew she battled a chronic illness, spending her last years in solitude on the outskirts of town. A nurse later recalled how, in her final days, Barbara would close her eyes and listen to her own records, her fragile hands trembling as they hovered over a worn cassette player. When the news of her passing finally broke, the industry barely whispered. No tributes, no crowds, no honors, just a silence as deep as the one she carried throughout her career. But Barbara didn't need applause. She had already captured the world in a single song. And if you've ever heard Hello Stranger, let it remind you, live in such a way that no one is ever forgotten in silence. Barry White wasn't just a singer. He was the very sound of desire in the 1970s. A sex symbol with a voice that rumbled like thunder yet caressed like silk, he became the embodiment of love itself, earthly and divine. But behind that golden aura was a man whose body was slowly breaking down. In his final years, Barry battled high blood pressure, diabetes, and ultimately kidney failure that tied him to dialysis. A friend once remembered walking into that clinic and finding Barry still singing softly, lifting the spirits of other patients, even as his own strength slipped away. The same heartbeat that had once set the world swaying could no longer carry him. And when he passed, millions remembered the countless love songs he left behind. But few knew that Barry had once confessed, the most painful thing is not illness, it's being forgotten when you're no longer on top. His words cut deeper than any melody. In the end, Barry White gave the world more than music. He gave kindness. And with that unforgettable, earth-shaking voice, he reminded us that true love isn't just something you sing about. It's something you leave behind. Tammy Terrell. Tammy Terrell was a fleeting sunrise in Motown story, brilliant, beautiful, and gone too soon. At only 20 years old, she was already standing shoulder to shoulder with Marvin Gaye, giving the world eternal duets like Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Her smile lit up the stage, but inside, her body was betraying her. Doctors had discovered a malignant brain tumor, just as her career was beginning to soar. One night, while performing with Marvin, Tammy suddenly collapsed mid-song. The audience thought it was part of the act, until the silence stretched too long. It was the first glimpse of the tragedy unfolding. She endured surgery after surgery, each one dimming her strength. Yet Marvin never left her side. He would sit at her hospital bed, softly singing to her, hoping his voice could hold her here a little longer. A nurse remembered a haunting moment. Tammy opened her eyes and whispered, "I'm afraid of the light because I know it means the dark is coming." At just 24, that light went out. Marvin spiraled into years of depression, carrying the weight of a voice silenced too soon. Tammy's death wasn't just the loss of a young woman. It was a silencing of a soul that had only begun to sing. If life is a song, let it rise, let it soar, because none of us know if the chorus will come too early or never arrive at all. Billy Preston. Billy Preston wasn't just a musician. He was a prodigy, a keyboard genius who moved effortlessly between soul and rock. The Beatles wanted him. The Rolling Stones wanted him. Even Aretha Franklin wanted him. His fingers carried fire, and every band he touched turned brighter. Yet, behind the applause and the fame, Billy lived a life shrouded in loneliness and secrets. His story began with childhood abuse, carried into the heavy burden of early fame, and spiraled into the crushing pressure to maintain an image the world demanded. Depression, addiction, and paranoia became his constant shadows. By the end, the man who once shared the stage with legends spent his final years in a nursing home. His body ravaged by cirrhosis and kidney failure, tethered to dialysis 3 times a week. One nurse recalled him whispering, almost like a child, "I missed the limelight," before breaking down in tears. And when Billy died, the silence was deafening. A few artists sent flowers, but television barely mentioned his passing. The world didn't know how to face an unhappy genius. Or maybe it didn't care to. Billy once wrote, "If you hear my guitar, it means I'm still alive somewhere." And in a way, he is. His music still echoes, reminding us of the cost of brilliance and urging us to show gratitude, compassion, and kindness, especially to the most vulnerable souls among us. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton was a once-in-a-lifetime voice, a delicate soprano that soared to heights most singers could only dream of. With Loving You, she didn't just sing, she floated, like wind slipping through the clouds, carrying her into global stardom. But behind that fragile brilliance, her body was waging a silent war. In 1976, at the peak of her career, doctors diagnosed her with breast cancer and gave her only months to live. Minnie refused to surrender. She kept recording, kept performing, and used her platform to urge women to get screened, becoming one of the first Black artists to openly confront such a painful subject in an era when silence was the norm. One of her last performances told the story better than words ever could. Her voice, once boundless, could barely carry the opening lines. The audience wept, but Minnie, frail yet unbroken, whispered backstage, "As long as they can hear me, I'm alive." In 1979, at just 31 years old, she left this world and the music industry reeled in shock. Many believe that with today's medicine, she might have survived. Yet Minnie's legacy was never only her voice. It was her courage, her choice to live with grace and kindness, even in the shadow of fear. And because of that, she remains eternal, her fragile notes still echoing in the hearts of those who listen. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman once sang with sorrow so deep it felt like her heart was being strangled by its own pain. Her voice, melancholy, aching, unforgettable, made her the queen of love songs that could break you and heal you all at once. But behind the beauty of her music was a woman who refused to bow to an industry obsessed with control. Phyllis was fierce, uncompromising, and for that, she was often punished, ignored by record labels, overlooked by the media, and left to wrestle with demons in silence. By the mid-1990s, the weight became unbearable. On June 30th, 1995, just hours before she was scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater, she penned a heartbreaking note that read simply, "I gave it all away." Soon after, she swallowed a fatal dose of pills and was found lifeless in her apartment. Her death left behind a haunting question. If music can heal the soul, why couldn't it save the singer? That question still brings tears to those who loved her. Phyllis's silence wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning, a reminder that the world is quick to listen to a voice, but far too slow to truly hear the person behind it. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass was once the very definition of soul's masculine power. His deep, velvet voice wrapped itself around listeners, stirring passion and vulnerability in equal measure. But in 1982, everything changed. A devastating car crash left him paralyzed from the neck down. Overnight, the sex symbol who had women fainting at his concerts was confined to a wheelchair, relying on others for even the simplest tasks. Though he fought to return to the stage, his body could never fully keep pace with his spirit. In the quiet years that followed, away from the spotlight, the weight of loss grew heavier. One relative remembered the heartbreaking moment when Teddy, listening to close the door, whispered through tears, "My voice is still here, but I am gone." When complications from surgery claimed his life, he carried with him an unspoken sorrow. Perhaps the cruelest fate wasn't the loss of his mobility, but the silence forced upon a man whose very essence was to stand, to sing, to be in front of millions who adored him. Gwen Guthrie. Gwen Guthrie isn't a name you hear often in the headlines, but for true lovers of soul and funk, she's a hidden jewel. Her anthem, Ain't Nothing Going On, but the rent cemented her as a fiercely independent voice in an industry still dominated by men. Yet, behind the power of her music was a life shadowed by struggle. Gwen battled uterine cancer in silence, no press releases, no public sympathy. She faced it alone. One doctor later revealed that even during chemotherapy, she scribbled lyrics on hospital napkins, refusing to let her creativity fade. When she passed away at just 48, there was no star-studded funeral, no front-page tributes. The music world had already moved on. Her voice, once soaring, became a faint echo in a rapidly changing scene. But her quiet strength left something lasting. For those who know her story, Gwen Guthrie remains a reminder that true courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's choosing to live and create boldly, even when no one is listening. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross wasn't just a singer. He was a voice that melted America's heart. He didn't need fancy dance moves or Hollywood tricks. All he had to do was open his mouth, and suddenly an entire audience was wrapped in a dream. But behind the spotlight, Luther's life was marked by loneliness. He kept his feelings locked away, living privately, often finding comfort only in his mother's presence. When she passed, his world crumbled. In 2003, Luther suffered a devastating stroke that left him in a coma. Even after he regained consciousness, he could never sing with the same power again. For the next 2 years, he lived quietly, almost hidden, until the day he passed in a New Jersey hospital. Fans often said Luther was a man who sang about love, but never shared a love of his own in public. That quiet ache lingers in every note of Dance with My Father, a song that still brings listeners to tears. And then there was Isaac Hayes. With his shaved head, dark shades, and a voice that rumbled like an earthquake, he redefined soul. He won an Oscar for the iconic theme from Shaft and pushed music forward, blending funk, strings, and social protest into something unforgettable. But as the years passed, illness began to steal his strength. He retreated from the public eye, diving deeper into his faith and his work. Then, one morning in August 2008, tragedy struck. His wife found him collapsed beside a treadmill, headphones still on. He died soon after, reportedly from a stroke. What haunted fans most was the mystery. No one knew what he had been listening to in those final moments. Some whispered it was an unfinished recording. What they do know is this: Isaac Hayes never stopped creating. His body gave out, but the music inside him never did. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston was once the golden voice of America. The kind of voice that could stop a crowd in its tracks and leave an entire arena holding its breath. Her high notes weren't just sung, they were felt, echoing to the soul of anyone who listened. But behind the spotlight, Whitney's life unraveled. Failed marriages, addiction, career battles, and relentless media scrutiny turned her world into a storm she could never quite escape. In 2012, on the eve of what was supposed to be a triumphant comeback, tragedy struck. Whitney was found lifeless in the bathtub of the Beverly Hilton Hotel. The room was heavy with steam, a radio still playing faintly in the background. Toxicology reports revealed sedatives and illegal drugs in her system. A hotel manager recalled chillingly, she had just been singing in the hallway. Her voice was still beautiful, but her eyes were broken. After her death, the world asked a haunting question. Was Whitney destroyed by her own demons, or was she a casualty in an industry that drained her spirit dry? No matter the answer, one truth remains unshakable. There will never be another voice like Whitney Houston's. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson wasn't just a superstar. He was a phenomenon, a force that reshaped music, dance, and culture. From Billie Jean to Heal the World, he rose beyond the stage and became a symbol known in every corner of the globe. But with unimaginable fame came unbearable isolation. Scandals, disfigurement, and relentless allegations pushed him deeper into the shadows, where sleepless nights left him relying on pills just to find rest. On June 25, 2009, inside his Los Angeles mansion, the king of pop took his final breath. His doctor allegedly administered propofol, a powerful anesthetic meant to bring him sleep, but instead it silenced him forever. Michael stopped breathing, and for a moment, so did the world. The shock was instant. The grief was universal. And the question still echoed today. Was he betrayed by those entrusted to protect him, or crushed under the unbearable weight of trying to live a normal life in an impossible spotlight? Michael once wrote, "If you want to change the world, start with yourself." Yet, who was there to save him? That haunting question lingers in the silence he left behind. Behind the glittering lights, so many hearts beat in secret pain, lonely, unseen, unheard. This video isn't about reliving death. It's about remembering that compassion can save a soul. A kind word, a gentle look, a moment of understanding. Sometimes, that's all it takes to keep someone alive. Thank you for walking with us through these powerful stories and fragile memories. If a name or a moment touched your heart, share in the comments. And don't forget to like and share this video, so the world never forgets that these legends once lived. and were deeply loved.